Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I think I'm looking at the wrong screen because I can't swap my presenter screen in the presentation today for some reason, but we're going to get started. So welcome. Good morning. Thanks for joining us and participating in today's Capacity Connect webinar, Understanding and Managing Your NORR. My name is Mark Dubé. Prior to my consulting career, I spent over 20 years as a CFO of an Ontario tribal council. And I've learned to think of the NORR as a valuable external resource, similar to a monthly bank statement or visa statement, or a vendor statement. We must carefully and thoughtfully review the NORR and reconcile it to our internal records every month. This webinar is a complementary or partner piece to my recent best practices for ISK reporting, which can be found on the Capacity Connect website. If you review them together, you'll maximize your understanding of the recommended process. You'll optimize your funding availability and timing, and you'll save yourself the stress of constant notifications of late or overdue reports. So let's get started with the basics. What is a NORR? NORR stands for Notice of Reporting Requirements report. The reporting requirements referred to are the ones set out in your funding agreements as conditions of continued funding. By signing and accepting the funding agreement, your chief and council have committed to completing and submitting the specified reports by the due dates. And by delegating the program delivery responsibilities to you and other frontline staff, they've also delegated that reporting responsibility. How do we get an NORR and when? By default, every recipient of ISK funding receives a NORR during the first week of every month. It's as at the end of a previous month, just like a bank statement. ISK sends it to whoever they have been instructed to by your First Nation chief or senior administrative person. This instruction must be in writing. It can be changed and improved by appropriate persons. Contact your senior funding services officer to change this list of recipients. If your First Nations senior finance or admin team is progressive and uses GSIMS, the Grants and Contributions Information Management System, they may provide you with printouts more regularly. They can generate department-specific reports at any time. What does the NORR tell us? The NORR reports all data collection instruments, or DCIs. These are ISK's reports that are about to come due, currently due, drastically overdue, or received and under review. The NORR can and should be referred to regularly, at least monthly. The information should be used to plan your reporting efforts. No one wants multiple reports hanging over their heads. There's no reason for reports to become late for a professional service provider with the skills and capability to deliver the services related to the reporting requirement. Let's look a little closer at each of these, what they call statuses, what they look like, what info they offer, what they mean. They offer lots of useful information here. They tell you the DCI name and the name of the program, what it's used for. They tell you the fiscal year is funding. Sometimes you have 3 or 4 or 5 years outstanding of one or two things or some oddball report. They tell you which region, which funding region, Ontario region for most of us, no longer south or north. They tell you what the original due date was. They report the status. In this case, due soon, in 30 days or less. Report is due. And they have a days column. Not surprisingly, this status indicates that this specific DCI is indeed due soon. In this example, it's due in 10 days. There's lots of useful information here. The only failing, in my opinion, is that 30 days ago, this report would have been due in 40 days, so not included in the NORR. You would have had to rely on your own proactive actions and created a list of outstanding reports at the beginning of the fiscal year and used your Microsoft calendar or something comparable to have received your 60 or 30-day reminder. Such proactive scheduling is explained again in the most recent webinar, Best Practice for ISK Reporting. It has lots of information on these proactive practices. Another status, overdue, due soon. Again, it provides all the same information. This And in this instant, obviously, this status indicates that the specific DCI is overdue. You'll see it in writing. And in this specific example, in 5 days. In this example, it's possible that the last NORR report was more than 30 days ago, and in that this report, again, was not listed as due soon. Another gentle nudge to remind you to maintain your own list of reports that you're responsible for and your own reminder process for due dates. The next status is drastically overdue or deemed unobtainable. Again, program name, fiscal year, region, due date, and status. You're going to be surprised to learn that this report is still due or overdue and must still be completed and submitted. Deemed unobtainable does not mean that a report is no longer required to be completed and submitted. It does not mean that funding halts will be released. It simply means that the data from the missing reports will not be used to determine current or future funding eligibility. Again, if ISC can't get this information from you, they cannot use it in allocating current funding. It's only fair that if you didn't submit a report on how your funding was used, or even if you did use it last year, you can't expect to be considered for the same funding in a subsequent year. Imagine, not really imagine, there's only a fixed pot of money for all the First Nations in Ontario to deliver a specific service in the next fiscal year. If one or several recipients don't report on the use of last year's pot, it wouldn't be fair to underfund all the other First Nations because we think that maybe those derelict reporters might have a use for this year's money or might be entitled to it. The next status, the last one we'll talk about, is received and under review, but not yet accepted. Again, it shares all the different relevant information. The status acknowledges receipt and indicates that it's under review. The interesting thing in these statuses, in this specific example, is you'll see the report is 355 days overdue. But it's not clear from this report if it was received on time or yesterday. It's not clear if the recipient sat on it for a year or if the reviewer did. If this report has not been accepted in a reasonable time, it could impact your funding, especially current O&M calculations and entitlements. So communicate with your FSO. Let them know you're paying attention, that you're available to answer any questions or assist in any way. Make sure they know that you care and that you want to see that report accepted and cleared from your NORR. In summary, if the description is due soon, in 30 days or less, the report is due. If the description is overdue, the report is due. If the description is deemed unobtainable, can you guess? The report is due. Please keep in mind it's your responsibility as a frontline manager, director, or worker to get these reports in. It's no skin off ISC's nose if you can't be bothered to submit your reports on time. It may, however, be detrimental to your position, the First Nation as a whole, and most importantly, to the First Nation members who rely on you and your departmental funding for the continued delivery of important services. One issue I see often is a timing difference. Just like in we'll go through it first. The NORR is issued once a month. It's generated on a business day, very close to the month end. It's distributed by ISC reasonably promptly, within a week or so. Once it's received in the First Nation, it's distributed reasonably promptly, a week or less. But when frontline staff gets it 2 or more weeks later, they see items listed as outstanding that they've submitted, and they lose confidence in this process. Just like accounting, many departmental senior staff do not understand that a statement is for a period ended at the prior month end. They don't grasp that many tasks, activities, and the related expenditures they have carried out in the last week or month are not included on that statement. This can easily be addressed by pointing out in a covering email when distributing it in-house. So, big question, why do we care about the status of ISC reports? On a personal level, it's a job requirement and should be considered in the annual performance review. Failing to complete them may exclude you from consideration for raises or promotions, or even jeopardize your current role if funding is lost or held. Whether you work in admin, education, social services, or infrastructure, it is your job to deliver or facilitate the delivery of services to First Nation members, period. Part of the job is the reporting on that service delivery, and in many cases, the costs incurred by providing that services. If you're unable to do it, request some support or training. How do you feel about your peers, and employees repeatedly seeing external documents that show you're not doing your job? Continued, why do we care about the status of these reports? On an institutional basis, in most instances, the only way a non-politician can effectively illustrate to Canada or another funding agent that funding is insufficient is to submit an accurate, comprehensive report. That opportunity/responsibility is only available to senior departmental staff who are responsible for service delivery and the related reporting. Communicating that we spent $100,000 delivering a service that ISK only provided 64 is a very important task or responsibility. Illustrating that you serviced X number of members is the first step in documenting a need, which will be very useful in getting new funding, proposal-based or core. Funding is tied to only a few drivers. For example, membership, capital assets, school-age children, etc. If the reports that communicate and establish these drivers are not completed and submitted accurately and timely, funding will not be optimized. Submitting a capital or infrastructure report late precludes your entire First Nation from the related funding. For example, annual acres reports drive O&M calculations. If reports don't indicate entitlement on appropriate timing, O&M will not increase for that fiscal year. Another big example is a FNIF, First Nation Inuit Infrastructure Fund. Annual submission states the capital priorities of the First Nation. If you miss a deadline, the First Nation's desired capital projects for the next 5 years will not be reflected in the regional, provincial, or national plan, nor the related funding submissions pushed uphill to Treasury. Again, no one suffers but the First Nation members who needed the new water plant, school, health center, etc. Back to understanding your NORR, a brief note. Although suspended for COVID reporting, 2 reporting years now, late reports usually trigger funding halts. Excluding the COVID era, late reports have always resulted in funding halts. In other words, if a report is not submitted on time, funding stops. Having the report completed, submitted, reviewed, and cleared from the NORR after it's already late is not a quick process, and there be little or no departmental or program funding advanced during that time. And here's a sample. At the last page of our NORR every month, except during COVID, we've always seen what reports are late and how much money they're costing you. And once they're held, there is no guarantee they're going to come. If you don't do the reports and in future years, there's no illustrated need for that program because you didn't do your reports, that money could sit in payee for a year and then be lost. Funding halts. We know the COVID exemption is over and halts will be reinstituted soon. Current thought is that this return to holding funds will occur April 1, 2023, the beginning of the next fiscal year. We know that many First Nations have an unprecedented number of late and outstanding reports. Common sense tells us these First Nations are at risk of huge funding halts at the time of this return to normal reporting requirements and consequences. Managing your NORR. On a monthly basis, review it at least once a month. Review it like you care. Compare it to your list of reports that are due. Check for reports that you know have been submitted. Check for reports that you don't believe you're responsible for. Some reports are presented by ISK and departments that do not coincide with your division of duties or business structure in the community. Therefore, you may see it and know it's not yours, but other people responsible will never see it because it's in your report. Communicate concerns or irregularities with your FSO promptly. Communicate concerns, missing reports, errors, unreasonable review times, etc. with your FSO in writing. Update your list of reports and due dates with every amendment and inform the relevant staff. You and the relevant responsible staff need to be aware of all new or additional reporting triggered by new funding. The information will be clearly communicated in the funding letter or the budget amendment. And importantly, document each of your above actions. Records of your review, communications, notification of staff, etc. is extremely important. Again, I'll compare it to a bank rec. It's not sufficient simply to perform the exercise. You must document it. Some advanced notes. Best practice for senior or admin staff. Send NORR and other formal reminders of reporting responsibilities and due dates to all reporting staff monthly, at the very least. So they are reminded of what their responsibilities are, and so they know that you know when their reports are due or overdue. Secondly, present the NORR to Chief and Council monthly for formal approval. Chief and Council are ultimately responsible for reporting and maintaining the service levels. Having the NORR formally approved by Council every month informs them that their funding is safe or in jeopardy. If it's in jeopardy, they're informed of who's responsible for jeopardizing it. And such approval by Chief and Council, again, is documented in Council minutes and often made public. In summary, don't wait for a time crunch. Don't wait until you've cost your First Nation critically needed funding. Don't stress yourself out with crisis, last-minute scramble to get sloppy reporting in with no time for review or yourself, for your peers, your superiors. Plan ahead, prepare, familiarize yourself with the DCIs you're responsible for and their due dates, and what info you require from whom to complete it on a timely basis. In other words, work smart, not hard. And now the fun part. I'm hoping for a little more interaction this week. If you have any questions, you want to challenge anything I've said, or if you have some tips you'd like to share with the group, I welcome that now.